everybody. Can you hear me? All righty. Hi. Sorry I couldn't be there in person, but greetings from Brooklyn, New York. I don't know whether you can see this sliver of exposed brick in my workspace, but that's how you know I'm in Brooklyn. Exposed brick. I'm in Park Slope, Brooklyn, which is the baby-making part of Brooklyn. There's also the hipster part of Brooklyn called Williamsburg. You may have heard of that. Different regions. Anyway, greetings. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but thank you so much for allowing me to Zoom in. I am purposely going to be all over the place, topic-wise, but mostly in order to throw enough at you to get you thinking and have a lively Q&A, which hopefully we'll still be able to do through Zoom. The title of my talk is, Why Are There So Many Secular Jews, and What Lessons About Identity Might They Hold for Others Leaving Traditional Religion Behind? But first, I want to talk about the bigger picture. Like, why does that matter? Before I get into the Jewy stuff. So today I want to talk about why there are so many secular Jews and what lessons it might offer for others leaving traditional religion. But first I wanted to talk about the big picture, and I hope that I throw enough out there for us to have a lively Q&A, because I'd really much rather be guided by what's on your mind and what your interests are. But I'll share that my mission professionally and personally is to help create and share compelling visions for a glorious, secular, non-religious future for humanity. And we're not there yet. So this is imagining what the future might bring, what is going to be meaningful, and what is going to inspire humanity moving forward if we're able to leave traditional religion behind. And I think this is a challenge. I don't necessarily think we've got it right yet. There was a book a few years back called Religion for Atheists by Alain de Botton. I don't know if you have all dove into that or not, but it was an interesting challenge because he is an atheist who thinks we are secularizing poorly. And I will dive into that a little bit as well. But the challenge is that many religions offer a very compelling vision for the future, which is, of course, eternal salvation, joy in the afterlife, see your dead relatives again. You know, I'd love to see my Nana again. Unfortunately, I don't believe that, but it sure is a compelling vision, and I don't know that we can counter that with something else that is as compelling. But the closest that I've seen, frankly, is Star Trek, and I don't necessarily call myself a Trekkie, but I've watched probably enough of it to qualify, and I'm old enough to remember when there was only one Star Trek. And in the 60s, when the original series came out, it was radical. The suggestion, like, first of all, there was a Russian on the same team, right? It was all of humanity working together in peace and harmony to explore space, to boldly go. And what happened in the centuries is the kind of science fiction that I hope will become fact, that somehow humanity is able to come together. And I see secularity as a pathway to that future. Unfortunately, we got a long way to go. And if you're paying attention to the news at all, you know that these last couple of weeks have really been a disaster for those of us who believe in the separation of church and state. We seem to now have a Supreme Court that is a Christian nationalist, and it's very concerning. So in the short term, secular-minded people must join with liberal religious people to defeat religious fundamentalism and rebuild religious freedom in America. And not the topic of my talk today. We do have an initiative called Jews for a Secular Democracy that does focus on church-state separation. But the point is, there's many, many liberal religious people whose political views, whose goals are identical to secular and humanistic people, which is separation of church and state, bodily autonomy for everybody, and so on, and all of the things that we're seeing, no prayer in school, all the things that we're seeing overturned now by the Supreme Court. So in the short term, we have to coexist with liberal religion, and this is something I'm okay doing because I know a lot of liberal religious people, and there's a lot of folks who I admire who are actually leaders in the Jewish community. It's Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism. Conservative Judaism is the worst named denomination on the planet because they're not conservatives politically, they're generally very liberal. And I admire their political advocacy. There's really no daylight between them and the work I do in the atheist and secular community. That's the short term. I'm challenged though, because in the long term, I don't think that their repurposing of God and religion is going to work. I don't think it counters fundamentalism successfully. I think that fundamentalists hear them use the word God and think they're talking about their God, and I think it's brand confusion to use God to mean all of these different things. There's another news story. I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago, a poll that Americans' belief in God is dropping. Did folks see this poll that came out a couple of weeks ago from Gallup? I can't see you closely enough. Does anyone know what the percentage dipped down to for Americans who agree that, who say yes when the question is, do you believe in God? Any guesses? I don't know if I'll even be able to hear you if you shout it out. 81. So that's not a random guess because that's exactly correct. So yes, the Gallup poll was 81% of Americans who said they believe in God, and this is the lowest since Gallup first asked the question in 1944. And basically from the 40s until 2011, it was 98% of Americans said yes to that question, which is, I think, a fascinating question in and of itself. You know, if it's almost knee-jerk to say yes in America to that question, and especially if there's no follow-up questions about like, what kind of God do you believe in? But anyway, from 1940s until 2011, it was 98%. In 2011, it dropped to 92%, and then to 87% in 2013, and now 81%. That's a dramatic change. And it's still, to me, pretty shocking to be in such a small minority still that would answer no to that question. So I still don't feel like I think the trend is positive. I think the number is still pretty dramatic as far as making me feel in the minority. The other thing from that poll that was interesting was among those age 18 to 29, it's only 68% who said yes to believe in God. So if there's any silver lining in the religious fundamentalist takeover of the Supreme Court, is that I think it's turning off a lot of people to religion, and that I think spurs me on even more to kind of help facilitate and figure out, well, what are we providing as an alternative? And that's going to provide the same amount of meaning and significance in people's lives. One thing I do want to do before we go further, though, is kind of define our terms, because I'm comfortable calling myself an atheist, but that word has been used for a variety of different meanings. So I just want to define what I mean when I say atheist, which is that I don't believe in the God of the Bible or any man-made gods. And as far as the mysteries of the universe, how did we get here? What came before? The unanswerable questions, I'm agnostic because how could I know? But I'm hopeful that one day we may have some of those answers, but I don't think we know. So I'm comfortable with the word agnostic to describe that. And then as far as my values, that's where I use the word humanist. And again, there's lots of ways of defining humanism, but for me, it's that I feel every person has infinite value. There is no dollar amount for a human being. And therefore, if we're all of infinite value, we're all equal. And the goal is improve people's lives. And the way to do it is through what is best for most people: science and understanding and empathy and reason and logic to get to the best answers, as opposed to religious texts, as opposed to answers that were provided thousands of years ago that may no longer be relevant anymore. So this statistical information aligns with what Pew has also found when they do research. You may have heard that they are now tracking the nones, N-O-N-E-S, the nones in America, those who describe themselves as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, when asked about their religious identity, is now 29% of Americans. Again, it still seems like a really small percentage to me, but the trend is suggesting that that number will continue to increase. Jews have been on the vanguard of this trend for a while now, and I realize that there may be a variety of levels of knowledge about Jews and Judaism in this audience. I don't want to presume any knowledge. I've met folks. I met a woman not too long ago who grew up in a Christian homeschooling setting who was surprised to meet a living Jew. I wasn't the one she met, but she told me this story that the first Jew she met, she was shocked because she was taught that Jews were an ancient people like the Hittites, and had no idea that there was a history that continued on after Jesus. So I recognize that we can go from probably that end of the spectrum to folks who are actually Jewish themselves or super knowledgeable about it. I don't want to presume any knowledge. I also don't want to do a whole Judaism 101, but I will give you a couple of key points. And again, and maybe you have Jewish friends or maybe you don't know any Jews. In Houston, there are a little bit more than 50,000 Jews as far as the last study that I've seen, but that's still less than 1% of the population there. Nationally in America, Jews are about 2% of the population. So we are a really tiny minority with admittedly an oversized representation in a lot of walks of life. And the challenge, I would say, the thing to know, the thing I want to share the most is that Jews and Judaism don't fit neatly into the boxes that you check on surveys and such. And that makes it really complicated and frankly makes Jews a vulnerable population, even more so than other tiny minorities, because we don't fit into people's boxes and folks want to fit people into boxes. So is Judaism a religion? Sure. But it's much more than that. And there's no easy way to describe it. In the 1920s and 30s, it was described as a race, as was Italian and Irish. Today, we call that an ethnicity. But Judaism is a peoplehood of ethnicities because there are multiple ethnicities within Judaism. When I say ethnicity, I'm saying something you're born into that has existed for many generations. So my ethnicity is Ashkenazic Judaism, meaning I trace my ancestry to what's called the Pale of Settlement. It is the land between Germany and Russia that at times has been Poland, has been Germany or Russia, Ukraine, and so on. And about 80% of America's Jews trace their ancestry to that part of the world, but there are Jews from Spain. There are Jews from the Middle East. There is a community, a remnant community of Jews in China. And there is a Jewish community in Ethiopia, most of whom are now in Israel. And all of those people look like the people from those parts of the world due to intermarriage and so on. So it's not one ethnicity. It is not, certainly it's considered one religion, but the spectrum between ultra-Orthodox and secular humanistic Judaism is as wide as any religion could possibly get. And so no easy boxes to check on this. But one of the things that makes Judaism as a religion more complicated, I think, is because belief or faith is not a requirement. And this adds to that level of complication. Much more about following the laws, the Jewish laws. And just as an example, you may know that one of the 10 commandments is to honor thy parents, right? To honor your mother and father. It's not love your mother and father. That's not the commandment. It's honor. And why is that? Because you can't force somebody to love somebody. You can't measure it, but you can measure how you honor somebody, because that's about behavior. So belief, faith, so on. And the other thing you may know is that in the Bible, the name Yisrael or Israel translates as wrestling with God. So like right from the very beginning, it was baked in this idea of, we don't have agreement on what this thing is that we're calling God. This is it's not a top down. We're open for debate on it. The other piece you should know is that Jews have never only used the Bible as the source text, as the only text. It's the source text, but the Talmud is the interpretation of it, and that's been the Jewish law. That's the way that Jews live. So it's very distressing, for example, to see the fundamentalists in America talking about homosexuality as this abomination, because they're pulling that line from the Jewish Bible. And that's not how Jews have interpreted it, certainly in the last several decades. But even as far as punishment goes, basically, mixing your clothing, cotton poly blends were, punishable by death in the Old Testament, and it's never been implemented that way. So Jews have always been a complicated ethno-national quasi-religion mix that can't easily fit into any boxes. And since Enlightenment, the Jews who were able to break away from an oppressive expression of their religion did. And so we've got this long tradition of influential secular Jews who did not practice their religion, still very much identified as Jewish, or were identified by the world as Jewish. You may have heard of Sigmund Freud or Albert Einstein, and many other people. And most of the most highly achieving Jews in the past 150 years were not at all practitioners of their religion. In 2020, Pew did a survey specifically of American Jews. They had done one in 2013, and it follows up on other studies that had been done. But the 2020 one was the first time that I've seen where they've asked the question flat out, do you believe in the God of the Bible? And I was so glad that they asked this question, because of the work that I do, and I'd long known it was a minority, but I didn't know how few. The answer that Pew came up with was that only 26% of American Jews believe in the God of the Bible. And that compares to 56% of all Americans who answer the question, yes, about the God of the Bible. They did ask a follow-up question. For those who said no, do you believe in some higher power or spiritual force? And 50% of Jews did say yes to that, compared to 33% of all Americans, meaning Only 10% of all Americans said no to either God of the Bible or some other kind of God, whereas nearly a quarter, 22% of Jews are flat out atheists. And at the same time, Pew found more Jews in America today than at any other time in US history. It's still small, it's about 7 million people, but that's more than there have ever been in the US. And this is despite high rates of interfaith marriage between people who are Jewish and people who aren't Jewish. In other words, those households are raising their kids with some Jewish identity. Why? Why still be Jewish if you are moving away from that traditional religion? I think there's a lot of answers, and I think that these answers may cross over to other groups as well. Certainly, the family connections is very relevant because almost all Jews in America were born into it. You can convert into Judaism, but it doesn't happen a whole lot. Jewish history, I think, drives a lot of people's identities. I don't know how much you know about it. I presume you've all heard about the Holocaust. It wasn't a good thing. My mom was born in a displaced persons camp after World War II because her parents survived the Holocaust. It's something that has shaped who I am. And I think a lot of Jews are still very much connected to the unique history of the Jewish people. By the way, the Holocaust, I think, was one major driver towards secularity for Jews who may have still been believing in God, because it raises the inevitable question of where was he? There's also kind of a classic Jewish joke that, Jews are called the chosen people, and wouldn't it be nice if sometimes God would choose somebody else for a change? So I think that one thing that drives my identity as a Jew is that historic persecution. I haven't experienced it in my life, but I knew my grandmother. I knew what she went through. And I like to hope that this minority experience that I've had growing up in America increased empathy. And I'd like to think that all of us, if we are non-religious, I just gave you the statistics on what a small minority we still are, also helps increase empathy. We know what it's like to be a minority. We know what it's like to be a discriminated minority. There's only one person in all of Congress who is openly atheist, despite the numbers that suggest we are a quarter of the American population. Why is it political death for a candidate to admit that they're atheist? So we are an underrepresented, certainly, minority. Does that drive us to make the world a better place? Does that drive us to support other minorities who are struggling for equality? I'd like to think so. So to me, that's another driver of meaning behind being Jewish. And so to get back to, I mentioned Religion for Atheists by Alain Dubuton, who chastised us for secularizing poorly. And his book kind of goes through, what does religion do well? He talks a lot, for example, of sacred spaces, right? What do churches do? When you walk into a church, certainly when they were first being created, when there was like nothing like it in the world, in some ways, it inspires. It makes you feel a connection to something larger than yourself, right? So I think that secular groups struggle with finding magnificent man-made structures to meet in. We can rent space, but to me, I feel something when I'm in nature. I feel something when I'm at the beach. By the way, we have a great beach in Brooklyn. It's called Coney Island. It's actually a lovely beach. There's just a lot of people there, unfortunately. So it doesn't get the same coverage that some of the more beautiful beaches do in the other parts of the country. But when I'm standing at the water and looking into the ocean, I feel something. And I like that feeling And I think a lot of people would call it spirituality. There are folks in my movement of humanistic Judaism who would never use that word because it has the word spirit in it, right? And it suggests that there's something coming into my body from the ether. That's not what I think is happening. I think it's chemical reactions in my brain, but I like that and I want to feel that, right? And how can we foster that? Beautiful music helps. I enjoyed the performance that preceded my talk, and I think that's part of the goal. And I think that ritual can help foster all of these positive human emotions. And secular Jews still do Jewish ritual. My movement has created a liturgy around humanism so that secular Jews don't need to use the traditional liturgy that is thanking God, but we still do the rituals. So for example, you may have heard of the holiday of Hanukkah that coincides with Christmas most years. And there's a menorah that is lit, 8 candles with a 9th helper candle that lights it. And I do that. I'm not praying to God when I do it, but it does connect me to my family. It connects me to my family history. I know that it had been done by my ancestors. I can't name my ancestors earlier than 1880, but I know that it goes back for thousands of years. And likewise, celebrating Passover, which many of you probably heard of. You know, the story of Exodus likely never happened. I think it's still a fascinating story that the Jewish origin story is as slaves. That I think that has shaped a lot of our thinking, as opposed to so my wife is from Japan. Their origin story is that they descend from the sun goddess, right? A little bit more lofty than descending from lowly slaves. But so I'm kind of proud that our origin story emerges out of slavery and that the Exodus story is an inspiration for other people who have suffered. But it likely never happened. And so when I do Passover, what I'm celebrating is not the story itself, which I think is myth, but the story of the story. The Passover Seder has been going on for at least 2,500 years, and that's remarkable. And aspects of it are the same. So to me, that's a connective piece. And I think that the secular community, which is so brand new in so many ways, just doesn't have something like that yet. I don't know if you've done stuff for Darwin Day, but it's just not the same. I like it. It's good. We should keep doing it. Maybe in 2,500 years, it'll be as powerful, but there's a reason that Jews in America in large numbers still celebrate Passover and Hanukkah because of that connectiveness. And I think that can carry over. I think there are plenty of atheists that put up a Christmas tree, I have to presume. I don't think Christ, frankly, has really ever been in Christmas. I know now there are a lot of folks who want to put Christ back into Christmas. They don't talk a lot about the pagan origins of that holiday, but I certainly don't begrudge anybody for celebrating it because it's fun and it's nice, and why not? So I think that if we can be self-reflective and kind of claim or reclaim some of these rituals, they can still provide meaning. But as I said at the beginning, I'm concerned about how to do this. I don't have all the answers. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'd love to hear what works for you, because I don't think we have it yet. And we are in competition in some ways, or rather, I should say, I don't see my job as trying to deconvert anybody. I put my story out there and my beliefs out there because I know that there are many, many people who believe as I do, but don't know that there are other options. So I'm putting out there other options, certainly in the Jewish community, where there are so many atheist Jews who don't know that they can still connect to meaning in their heritage and history without having to fake it, without having to pretend that they actually believe in the myth. And I want to say so. And as a secular movement, we're also putting that out there for folks to find us, and hopefully they are and they have. But then the question becomes, can we still use ritual to make meaning? How else do we make meaning? You know, at the beginning, I heard the announcement about food banks, and obviously, helping other people to me is the most meaningful thing you can do. And maybe there's a way to ritualize it. I think ritualizing things is just a human function that we are hardwired to do in a lot of ways. I had the honor of meeting a man named Tom Flynn, who unfortunately is no longer alive, but for many years he was at the Center for Inquiry, which is a great secular organization. And he also was editor of Skeptic magazine. He told me he doesn't do any rituals. He was anti-ritual. And I said, Tom, surely you had a wedding, right? That's a beautiful ritual that people want to do, whether they do it secularly or religiously. He's like, nope, we just went down to City Hall and signed the papers. And I'm like, well, you know, what about Christmas? He's like, nope, don't touch it. I work on Christmas. He later, this was before he then made a thing of live streaming himself working during Christmas. But then I said, well, what about New Year's Eve, right? A secular holiday. Everyone celebrates New Year's Eve. Don't you at least like stay up till midnight to watch the ball drop? And he said, no, we're in bed by 9:30 every New Year's Eve. And I said, aha, that's your ritual, right? So even in being anti-ritual, he was creating new rituals for himself. So I think we're kind of hardwired for it, but the question is, how is it meaningful? How is it powerful? How does it change people's lives? So that's what I'm thinking about. I do think that even within Judaism, not just secular humanistic Judaism, but the liberal religious denominations of Judaism, they're trying to figure it out too. They are saddled with the traditional language, and my movement is not. So I'm hoping that gives us some kind of advantage in sharing this with secular people. If you attend one of our holiday celebrations or life cycle events, there's no reference to God or the supernatural, but there is reference to the Jewish experience, but also just the human experience. And that's something we all share when we do funerals, you know, and this is, I don't know how this is in other religions. Certainly in the Jewish religion, all of the liturgy is God talk, and much of it is in Hebrew, which is how a lot of Jews deal with it because they don't understand Hebrew. I think Catholicism was like this until they switched from Latin to English. In Judaism, you just don't want to read the translation. You know, the Hebrew has a kind of cadence to it that's comforting. Once you actually read what it says, you're like, oh, I don't believe that. I went to the ritual after death in Judaism is called sitting Shiva. Shiva is the mourning period. And I went to a friend of mine's Shiva for her father who had passed away, and a rabbi came, which I thought this was just a condolence call, but a rabbi came, and literally the first blessing of this little mini service that the rabbi led was thanking God. And I don't want to thank God when a close family member dies. I want to be mad about it. I want to be sad. I want to be upset, and I want comfort. But I certainly don't want to be claimed to be thankful to God for it. So I just remember feeling such tension and upset because I knew my friend also didn't believe it, and yet didn't know that there were these other options of how they could still do it Jewishly, but not have to say those words. And in a secular humanistic Jewish funeral, it would be about celebrating the life of that person, but also honoring the pain and acknowledging the hurt that those of us feel for the loss, and just sitting with it and acknowledging it and understanding that this part sucks. So I don't think our liturgy says sucks, but you get the point. So I'm interested to hear how folks think about ritual who have left other religions or perhaps grew up with no religion. Do you make new ritual to create meaning? Do you incorporate meaning and ritual from your religious tradition and change it? I feel like, and I think this was the point of that book, Religion for Atheists, there's the baby and the bathwater. And I think for us secularists, it's fair enough to say that the bathwater that we're throwing out is God. It's the supernatural belief. But the baby might still have importance, meaning, and stuff that we can pull out of it that can still inspire us, make us feel better, and make us be better as people. So thank you for letting me share a bit about what I'm working on, and I'd very much love to hear from folks, if they're able, about how this hits and what you're doing as far as making ritual and meaning from a secular perspective. Thank you so much.
All right, we've got our first question. We'll kind of just go ahead and jump right into Q&A, but we do have our first question from Georgia.
Hi. Hello. Okay, so I identify as Jewish. I was raised as a Jew. I was converted when I was 6. My mom kind of brought us back to our roots because we immigrated from Germany several generations back, and then she married a Sephardic Jew and then converted us. Anyways, I had a question about when you do the bracha, do you do it in Hebrew, and how do you leave out God? Like, how does that go? Because all I can hear in my head is Baruch Atah Adonai, and that's like the first.
That's great. Yeah, no, so the blessing for the Hanukkah candles that we do is Baruch Ha'or Ba'olam, Baruch Ha'or Ba'adam, Baruch Ha'or Ba'Hanukkah. So that translates as blessed is the light in the world, blessed is the light in people, blessed is the light of Hanukkah. So it still has the Baruch. And so again, you know, some hardcore atheists may say, you can't even say blessed, right? Let's not even say blessing, blessed. It's all religious and we got to ditch it all, right? And I get that. I understand it. But like I said, I'm okay even with the word spiritual if I then get to explain that, you know, spiritual just means chemicals bouncing around my brain. Likewise, I'm okay with the word blessed. I feel blessed by my kids, for example. I feel blessed to be a parent, but I'm not blessed by some supernatural power. So we literally rewrote the words because we don't have to say it the traditional way. And so shj.org is our website. I think some of the stuff is on there, but we also have a free listserv and we send that stuff out before the holidays. So it's all available. And look, and this has been around, our movement has been around since the mid-60s. And that is the main innovation, right? We don't say those words. And that was not enough of an innovation to become the largest denomination in Judaism. In fact, we are, frankly, the smallest denomination in Judaism. The largest is Reform Judaism that still uses their traditional liturgy. And I grew up in the conservative movement, which is a little bit more to the right of them as far as ritual practice. But what happens when I was growing up is I would just make the word God mean something different. And maybe you all have had this experience where you do the kind of mental gymnastics of every time I hit the word God, I'm going to think about like all the good in the world or all the people I love or whatever. And that way you can sit through the service. And the first time I went to a Yom Kippur high holiday service in humanistic Judaism, I recognized I wasn't doing that mental gymnastics. I didn't have to because I was agreeing with what I was reading. And it was such a relief, you know, and it doesn't mean that I now go to humanistic Jewish services every week. I don't even go once a month. frankly. I participate in things, but not the ritual of liturgy, right? I think many, if not most, secular people are not liturgists. So that innovation is helpful for the few holidays I celebrate a year, but it still didn't make me a Congregationalist participant. I'd rather organize in other ways. I like what you're doing with Oasis, which is why I was honored to be invited, because I'd much rather get together with like-minded people and have intellectual conversation and debate. The innovation helped for some folks. I think over the past 60 years, it has allowed literally tens of thousands of Jewish households to remain connected. But we need more innovating around being secular and humanistic and still being Jewish. And so that's the work that I do. But thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Our next question is from Mike.
This could be a yes or no question, but I was wondering if you presume to be or claim to be a descendant of Judah, son of Israel.
I'm agnostic. Can I prove it? No. Am I pretty confident that I'm connected to that history of, for those of you who know, Rome destroyed Israel, Palestine is what they called it, in 70 AD. And the Jewish diaspora began at that point and spread out. And the Ashkenazic Jews came through Spain, eventually got kicked out of all the best places, ended up in the Palest settlement for 800 or 900 years. Yeah, I haven't done one of those 23andMe's, but the reason why I haven't is because I just feel like it's going to be 100% what they actually call Jewish, but is really Ashkenazic Jewish descent. And so I feel a connection to that history, to that Jewish history. I do feel like I am descendant of those people in ancient Jewish history. What's interesting about the genetic studies is there are a group of Jews that trace their ancestry to the priesthood in temple times, right? So in 70 AD is when the Romans destroyed the temple, the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And before that, the tribes of Israel had different roles, and the priestly class were called the Kohanim. So if you know anybody with the last name Cohen, more likely than not, they're connected to that group of Jews. And there is a genetic marker that ties many of those people together, which is pretty remarkable, because first of all, there was a lot of intermarriage, and that's why I'm pasty white and Ethiopian Jews are not, right? There was marriage, certainly, between local population and the Jews who arrived there, but there was also a lot of intermarriage, which is why Ashkenazic Jews also suffer from certain horrible genetic diseases like Tay-Sachs. And so I do feel that connection historically. At the same time, I'm not totally comfortable with that because I don't like ethno-nationalism on anybody's part. So like I said, I really hope for a future where we can retain our cultures, but you can also take on any cultures you're interested in. And it's not about who's better. It's just simply, this is interesting, this is unique, and so on. And as I mentioned, my wife is from Japan. I think Japanese history is fascinating, and Japanese culture. I will never be Japanese, but my kids have Japan as their cultural heritage as much as they have Jewish, as much as they have American. And when they grow up, maybe they will marry somebody who is half Guatemalan, half Irish. And then their kids will have 4 cultures to draw from. And the nice thing about being a cultural Jew or a cultural anything is it's not a zero-sum game. You can do it all as much time as there is in the day, like whatever you're interested in, versus at least the monotheistic religions that really have a certain, at a certain point, you hit up against that boundary, right? You know, what's the difference between Judaism and Christianity? At a certain point, there is that boundary of, you know, is Jesus Messiah or not? And so with culture, I'm never going to be Japanese, but I can participate in the food and the ritual and the culture as much as I want, and I love it. So that's how I want to relate more. But I will say that I've been to the Parthenon in Athens, and I've been to the Western Wall in Jerusalem. And as much as I understand intellectually what the Parthenon means in Western civilization, being at the Western Wall in Jerusalem was an emotional experience for me, because I know that that was the spot that literally hundreds of generations of my ancestors wanted to stand at, and I got to. And that kind of meaning I also want for my kids to have. But I understand that they're going to have it from my side. They're going to have a completely different set of meaning, hopefully, from my wife's side. And I hope and I believe that those are not going to be in conflict.
All right, we've got our next question from CB.
Thank you for talking to us, Paul. It's been enjoyable. My perspective is that I've always felt a strong affinity for Jews. I grew up fundamentalist Christian, which I just totally never seemed to take with me. And perhaps it's because I'm gay, but I've always had a strong affinity for Judaism, Jews and Judaism. But as a matter of fact, my husband and I have a very close friend who's Jewish, and we've often attended events at the Jewish Community Center here in Houston. And we've been to her house for Shabbat, which is my favorite ritual. I just love it. I love the idea of a ritual meal. On your website, do you have suggestions for how one can conduct rituals in a secular manner?
Right. So thank you so much, first of all. And you're getting at a lot of interesting different things. So, you know, there are other secular ritual religions, quote unquote, non-theistic religions. So I don't know if folks have heard of like ethical culture, or if any of you perhaps grew up with that. It's a small movement. It was actually founded by a rabbi's son like 150 years ago, 120 years ago. And what he did differently was he removed anything Jewish, and it was supposed to be like a universal ethical non-theistic religion. There's also universalist, Unitarian, humanists, right? And those don't have a tie to a specific religious or cultural history. For us, as humanistic Jews, we want to maintain that tie. So we don't have anything that is generic. We do have Shabbat, but the thing that's different about what we put out there is we don't do any policing of identity. If you want to take on our rituals, go for it. Like, we're not going to say this is only for Jews or this is only for humanistic Jews. If it provides meaning, by all means do it. And because you mentioned Shabbat, I think that's a great example. If folks don't know, you know, Jews were, I'd like to think, and we've been given credit for inventing the weekend. Basically, life before the Sabbath was the same every single day. And the notion of taking one day off a week was a radical departure from what anybody at that time knew. And what ultra-Orthodox Jews do on Shabbat is severe. So very severe. And like, I don't even feel comfortable necessarily sharing all of this out of school, but they take the rules that were written and extend it to the extreme, because when these rules were written, they were written at a time when so much didn't yet exist. So there's a rule for Shabbat that you cannot start a fire, right? Because creating a fire was work, and you're not supposed to do any work from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. And the thing is, today, to create fire in this room I'm sitting in, I push that switch on the wall, right? That's not work, but in ultra-Orthodox Judaism, that's still considered work, starting a fire, so they will not use electricity on Shabbat. Now, if the light happens to be on before sundown on Friday, then you can leave it on the whole weekend. And if you happen to have a timer on your VCR that's set before Shabbat, you can watch the shows like on Sunday. Like, there are all these loopholes, but the extent to which, and by the way, only 10% of American Jews are Orthodox. So I'm talking about a very, very small segment of Americans. Non-Orthodox Jews have taken a lot of liberties about what do we actually do here for Shabbat, because I think most Jews would agree the basic idea is a really good one. So one thing I will point you to is a book by a woman named Tiffany Schlein, who is also an atheist Jew, and she's a lovely person, and she wrote a book called 24/6, right? Instead of 24/7, 24/6. What she has done for the past decade with her family is observe what she calls technology Shabbat, where sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, they don't use technology, right? They use lights, they turn the lights on and off, they cook, but they don't use their cell phones. They turn off the internet. And the whole book is about how dramatically this changed their lives, how much more connected they are to each other, and how much more productive they are on the other 6 days. Now, I haven't been able to implement this in my own life, but it's such an interesting, compelling idea. And I think it's exactly the kind of thing of how do we take the good ideas from our traditions and just modernize it. We're not tied to doing it that way. The ultra-Orthodox do it that way because they think they're observing the actual words of God. Most Jews don't believe that. So what can we do with this that makes it so relevant? So it's great to hear that you enjoyed the Shabbat meal. And what I would just say is pick a night of the week. It could be Friday night. It makes a lot of sense for it to be Friday night, but maybe not, because maybe you're too exhausted at the end of the week. And make something special as a ritual every week. That's the week you go to the one special restaurant, or that's the week that you light candles, right? There's something special about lighting candles. We don't use candles regularly. So just taking a moment and being thoughtful. Everyone understands like the benefit of thankfulness, right? Can we spend 5 minutes as a family being thankful, or as a couple? All of these things I think can really be beneficial, and we don't need to give it up just because we are acknowledging that the source of it is not supernatural. These are all good ideas that human beings came up with.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm keeping an eye on the time, so this is going to be our last question.
I have one question. Also have a connection to Judaism. I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia. Our population was like 30 to 40% Jewish. Most of my friends were Jewish growing up. But I have a question about the favored and chosen ideas. How do secular Jews view the idea of being favored or chosen? And then how vital is that idea to the Jewish identity in general?
It's rejected. And in fact, even within Reconstructionist Judaism, which is still theistic as far as their liturgy goes, they reject that as well. And I think most Jews in America reject it. Look, every religion claims it's the truth, right? And so what better way to, make yourself special than say we were picked by God? But like, as I said, my wife's heritage is that they're descendant of the sun goddess. It allowed them to feel superior too. It is one of the disturbing pieces of religious Judaism that I think all religions have aspects that are very disturbing. So I think the good news is most Jews reject the notion. Like I said, there's been a lot of jokes about, why can't he choose somebody else for a change? Like the idea that, it's absurd. But I will say that I find Jewish history fascinating. As I said, I find Japanese history fascinating. I like history, but it's pretty remarkable. I don't think it's magical. I don't think it's driven by God, but I often, like, for example, wonder, I won't get too deep into this, but that the word kamikaze from the Japanese suicide World War II bombers actually came from an actual, what they call divine wind that blew, I think it was Kublai Khan's ships away from Japan when he was trying to invade Japan. And that's where they got the word from. And so I often wonder, what if Kublai Khan's invasion of Japan happened and he kicked the Japanese out, like he sent them on diaspora into China? Would the Japanese people maintain their unique identity, ethnicity, religion, if they were sent in diaspora into Asia for 2,000 years? The things that had to happen for me to still be Jewish 2,000 years after the destruction of an exile of a people, I think is just a remarkable story. So I feel connected to it. But I also have read lots of other people's histories, and everybody has a unique, fascinating, interesting history. So the notion of chosen, I think, can only be maintained by people who don't look much beyond themselves. And I will say that I just saw a meme the other day that I shared, but it's actually from a study from 2010 about who knows the most about religion. And they asked a huge number, like over 3,000 Americans, I think 24 questions about religion. And the highest scoring group was atheists. And then the second highest, which I think is interesting, is Mormons, and then third highest is Jews, at like very high numbers. Atheists got like 84% of the questions right, and Jews at like 82%. And then like Catholics got like 45% of the questions right. And, I've often heard in working in the Jewish community that if only these secular Jews understood the religion, then they would be religious, right? If only you understood the meaning and the beauty of this religion, then you would do it. And it's the exact opposite. Most atheists are intimately familiar with the religion that they left, and in fact are more familiar with other religions too. And it's because you have that knowledge. So I think it's the same thing for most Jews. We grew up this tiny minority in America. We grew up feeling that the majority's story of Christianity is untrue. And so a sliver of Jews would hear everyone else's story as untrue and then say to themselves, and therefore only I have the truth. But the overwhelming majority of Jews hear those other stories as untrue and then say, why would I think I have the truth? If every other story is wrong, why would I think mine is the one true one? So I put no stock in the notion of chosenness, and I really don't know any Jews who do today either. Thank you all so much. And if this is of interest to you, please reach out to me. This is what I do for a living, and I'd be happy to spend the time one-on-one if you're interested. And the website is shj.org, Society for Humanistic Judaism. And we welcome your involvement, or certainly your allyship. And if we could be of service to you all, please don't hesitate to ask.
Every now and again, we'll see eye to eye. Everything else sees, well, it's just a lie. Now see here, she explained it Passionate kisses are all I need tonight. Right now is the time. Don't break my heart. We'll cross that sea in due time. Don't break my heart. No, now don't worry, we're ready. It's the best place to start. I'm sheer and I am steady. Don't break my heart. She was there on a Tuesday, and the air was just right. She said, I may have found a deal, well, that I've found my fight. I asked, is the reflection consequences of my actions? No, not this time. As she explained to me, well, it's just a piece of glass. Right now is the time. Don't break my heart. We'll cross that sea in due time. Don't break my heart. No, now don't worry, we're ready. It's the best place to start. I'm here and I am steady. Don't break my heart. They may come, they may go. They will come and they will go. No, no. Started out evening, cried out, please leave me. Started out the evenings, cried out, please come home. Right now is the time. Don't break my heart. We'll cross that sea in due time. Don't break my heart. Oh, no, worry, we're ready. It's the best place to start. I'm sheer and I am steady. Don't break my heart. Every now and again, we'll see eye to eye. Everything else is, well, it's just a lie. Now, see here, she exclaimed into the night. Passionate kisses are all I need tonight.